In 1947, a simple shepherd threw a stone into a cave and changed the history of religion. The Qumran scrolls revealed a world that the official church had kept silent about. Texts about multiple messiahs, magic spells, alternative versions of the Bible, maps of the temple's treasures. Why did the Vatican hide these manuscripts for half a century? What is so dangerous about them for the faith of billions of people? Today, we will reveal the secrets that have lain in the caves near the Dead Sea for 2,000 years. If you are interested in the true history of religion, which is not taught in Sunday school, subscribe to the channel. And throwing a stone into one of the caves, he heard a strange sound of breaking pottery. Curiosity overcame fear, and the shepherd climbed down inside. What he discovered in the dim light of the cave overturned ideas about the early history of Christianity and Judaism. Inside the clay jugs were scrolls of leather and papyrus covered with ancient writing. Muhammad did not understand the value of his find. He took several scrolls and brought them to an antique dealer in Bethlehem. Syrian Archbishop Athanasius Yeshua Samuel purchased 4 manuscripts for a symbolic sum. He dated the scrolls to the Second Temple period, a time when the foundations of Judaism were being laid and Christianity was emerging. These were not just ancient manuscripts. They were the voices of people who lived in the time of Jesus, their beliefs, hopes, and prophecies. However, the outbreak of the Arab-Israeli War in 1948 interrupted the research. How many were there? Were there other caves with manuscripts? The answers to these questions could change our understanding of humanity's most sacred texts. Meanwhile, the Bedouins continued to find caves with scrolls. By 1950, 11 caves with manuscripts had been discovered in the vicinity of the ancient settlement of Qumran. Archaeologists launched a large-scale excavation. Each new discovery added pieces to the grand mosaic. Biblical texts, unknown psalms, prophecies, rules of the religious community, astronomical tables. The ancient library revealed a world that no one had suspected existed. But with each text that was made public, anxiety grew in religious circles. Some scrolls contained versions of biblical books that differed from the canonical ones. Others described beliefs and practices that did not fit into the official history of the Church. Still others mentioned messianic figures whose biographies were eerily reminiscent of the Gospel accounts of Jesus, but were written decades before his birth. Who created this library, and what secrets does it hold? Archaeologists arrived in Qumran in the spring of 1951. Father Roland Deveau of the French Biblical School in Jerusalem led the excavation of the ancient settlement. The ruins were only a kilometer away from the caves with the scrolls. This could not be a coincidence. Someone lived here. Someone created the library. Someone hid it before the impending catastrophe. Layers of ash and destruction indicated the violent end of the settlement in the 1st century AD. The excavations uncovered the remains of a complex. There were scriptoria for copying texts, pottery workshops that produced jugs for storing scrolls, ritual basins for ablutions, a common dining hall, and a water supply system with an aqueduct and cisterns. Archaeologists found inkwells, remains of tables and coins from the time of the Jewish revolt. Everything pointed to a religious community dedicated to the study of sacred texts and strict observance of ritual purity. The discoveries in the caves continued. The third cave yielded the most mysterious find: a copper scroll covered with enigmatic symbols. The fourth cave turned out to be a real treasure trove. Thousands of fragments from more than 500 different manuscripts. Here were parts of almost all the books of the Old Testament, many apocrypha, and texts created by the community itself. The 11th cave yielded the best-preserved copies, including a magnificent scroll of Psalms more than 8 meters long. The dating showed stunning results. The oldest fragments dated back to the 3rd century BC, the latest to the middle of the 1st century AD. This meant that the library had been created over a period of 300 years. Radiocarbon analysis of the linen cloth in which the scrolls were wrapped confirmed the dating. Paleography, the study of letter forms and writing styles, indicated different periods and different scribes. The Qumran community lived in isolation, but not in ignorance. Members of the community were fluent in Greek and Aramaic, as well as ancient Hebrew. They studied astronomy and created complex calendars. They believed in predestination and considered themselves chosen for the end times. Their rules of life were harsh: communal property, strict hierarchy, hours of prayer, ritual ablutions, and study of sacred texts from dawn to dusk. Archaeological data painted a picture of a community preparing for the apocalypse. In 68 CE, Roman legions suppressed the Jewish revolt. The 10th Legion moved along the western shore of the Dead Sea, burning everything in its path. The Qumran community knew the end was near. They carefully packed the scrolls into ceramic jars, sealed them, and hid them in caves. They hoped to return, but that did not happen. The settlement was destroyed, the community scattered or perished, and the library remained to await someone who would find it nearly 2,000 years later. The ancient historian Josephus, who lived in the 1st century CE, described 3 main currents of Judaism: the Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the Essenes. The first 2 groups are well known from biblical texts. The third remained a mystery until the discovery of the Qumran scrolls. According to Flavius, the Essenes lived in communities, rejected private property, observed the strictest ritual purity, and believed in the immortality of the soul. They avoided cities, settled in desert areas, and devoted their lives to studying sacred texts. Pliny wrote about their amazing way of life. They had no money, lived without women, renounced carnal pleasures, and were constantly replenished with new members tired of life's hardships. He called them an eternal people who had existed for millennia, even though no one was born into it. The scrolls confirmed this picture, but added incredible details. For the first year, he lived near the community, but was not allowed to participate in communal meals and purification rituals. In the second year, they participated in community life, but had no voting rights. Only after 2 years of probation and approval by all members were they fully accepted. Joining the community meant the complete transfer of property. Everything became communal: money, clothing, food. Community members could not own anything personal. Meals were held in strict order of rank. First the priests, then the Levites, then the other members. Silence was observed during the meal. The priest was the first to take food, blessing the bread and wine. Only then could the others eat. Every piece of bread and every drop of wine was considered sacred. The scrolls repeatedly mention a mysterious figure, the teacher of righteousness. He founded the community, gave it rules for life, and revealed the secret meaning of the prophecies. His opponent was the wicked priest, who persecuted the teacher and possibly killed him. These characters are not named, which has given rise to dozens of theories about their identities. Some scholars see in this story a prototype of the gospel narrative about Jesus and the high priests, which causes heated debate in religious circles. When scholars completed their inventory of the finds, the result astonished them. 970 manuscripts or fragments thereof from 11 caves in Qumran and the surrounding area. The longest scrolls were 8 to 9 meters long, while the shortest were fragments the size of a postage stamp. Among them were fragments of all the books of the Old Testament, except the book of Esther, 25 copies of Deuteronomy, 36 of Psalms, and 21 of the book of Isaiah. The oldest of these manuscripts are 1,000 years older than any previously known Jewish biblical manuscripts. Before Qumran, the oldest complete text of the Old Testament was the Leningrad Codex, dated to the 1000s CE. Now, researchers had in their hands texts written a century before the birth of Christ. Comparing the Qumran biblical texts with later versions caused a sensation. For the most part, they matched the Masoretic text, the standard Jewish version that had developed by the 7th to 10th centuries CE. This confirmed the accuracy of transcription over the centuries. But there were also differences. The second large group consisted of apocryphal texts, which were not included in the biblical canon. The Book of Enoch, almost completely lost in the Jewish tradition, has been preserved in several copies at Qumran. The Book of Jubilees, retelling the story from the creation of the world to the Exodus from Egypt, is represented by 15 copies. The community rule described in detail the rules of life, initiation rituals, and the system of punishment for transgressions. The Damascus document outlined the history of the community and its interpretation of the law of Moses. The War of the Sons of Light against the Sons of Darkness contained a detailed plan for an apocalyptic battle with a description of military formations, weapons, and prayers before the battle. The Temple Scroll presented the ideal temple and worship of the future. But the most mysterious were the Pesharim, commentaries on biblical prophecies. The community believed that the prophets of antiquity wrote about the events of the last days, that is, about the era of the community itself. The teacher of righteousness received from God the key to deciphering these prophecies. These texts revealed the worldview of the community, which was awaiting the imminent end of history and divine intervention. The large scroll of Isaiah from the first cave became a symbol of the Qumran finds, 8 meters of parchment, 54 columns of text, the book of the prophet Isaiah in its entirety, from the first to the last chapter. Dating showed the second half of the 2nd century BC. This meant that the scroll was copied about 100 years before the birth of Jesus. Prior to this discovery, Christian apologists had argued for the fulfillment of messianic prophecies based on manuscripts created 1,000 years after the events described. Now they had a text confirming the antiquity of the prophecies. The 53rd chapter of Isaiah is traditionally interpreted by Christians as a prophecy about the sufferings of Christ. He was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The Qumran text showed that these words existed long before the events of the Gospel. However, it also showed that the Jews of the Second Temple period understood this text differently. The Qumran community saw in the suffering servant of the Lord the entire people of Israel, or the teacher of righteousness. There was no clear connection with the future Messiah in their interpretation. The Qumran biblical scrolls revealed another secret: the process of forming the canon. But the boundaries of the third section, the writings, remained blurred. The Qumran community considered sacred texts that were later excluded from the canon. The Book of Jubilees was quoted on a par with Genesis. The book of Jeremiah in one of the Qumran scrolls is 8 verses shorter than the Masoretic text and closer to the Greek Septuagint. The Psalms are arranged in a different order, and the 151st Psalm, which is absent from the Masoretic text, is present in Qumran. The findings forced a rethinking of the theory of monolithic transmission of the biblical text. It is clear that textual plurality existed during the Second Temple period. Different communities and regions used different versions of the sacred books. But the Qumran scrolls preserved a snapshot of an earlier state, when the Word of God existed in a variety of versions. This discovery had explosive potential. If the sacred text had not been unchanged since it was written, if there were variants and versions, then on what basis could any one version be considered the only correct one? The Qumran finds showed that both traditions reflected only one line of transmission out of several that existed. This called into question the dogmas of divine inspiration and the infallibility of Scripture as understood by the traditional churches. But the Qumran community, which lived at the time when the canon was being formed, considered them sacred. Who had the right to decide which revelations were true and which were false? The Book of Enoch revealed a world that the canonical Old Testament does not mention. Enoch, the seventh from Adam, was taken alive by God to heaven. There, the book described in detail how 200 guardian angels descended to earth, took human daughters as wives, and begot the giants, the Nephilim. These creatures corrupted humanity, teaching them forbidden knowledge, magic, astrology, the manufacture of weapons and cosmetics. The Church rejected the Book of Enoch in the 4th century AD. Only Ethiopian Christians preserved Enoch. The Qumran findings showed that this book was extremely popular during the Second Temple period. The Book of Jubilees recounted events from the creation of the world to the giving of the Torah, dividing history into jubilees, periods of 49 years. It contained a chronology different from that of the Book of Genesis, and many additional details about the patriarchs. But most importantly, it established a special calendar of 364 days, divided into 4 equal seasons. This solar calendar contradicted the lunar solar calendar of the Jerusalem Temple. The Qumran community celebrated Saturdays and holidays on different days than the official priesthood. This was not just a chronological dispute. It was a question of who correctly understood the will of God. The testaments of the 12 patriarchs represented the dying instructions of Jacob's sons. Each of the brothers recounted his life, sins, and virtues, and gave advice to his descendants. The texts contained ethical teachings, messianic prophecies, and warnings about future trials of the people. Some passages were strikingly reminiscent of the Gospel commandments. "Love your neighbor," says the Testament of Issachar. "Forgive each other's offenses," teaches the Testament of God. These were the Apocalypse of Abraham, the visions of Amram, father of Moses, the prayers of Nabonidus, king of Babylon, New Jerusalem with a detailed description of the eschatological city, dozens of texts that expanded the biblical narrative. The Church called them pseudepigraphs, falsely attributed books. But for the Qumran community, they were a living revelation, a continuing tradition of prophecy. These texts showed that Judaism in the time of Christ was much richer and more diverse than official history presented. And this fact raised uncomfortable questions about how the canon was formed and who decided which divine revelations were worthy of preservation and which should be forgotten. A mysterious figure, the teacher of righteousness, appears repeatedly in the Qumran texts. His name is not mentioned, but his role in the creation of the community is undeniable. He was a priest, an expert in the Torah, who received a special revelation from God about the interpretation of prophecies. He founded the community, gave it a charter, and revealed the secret meaning of the sacred books. His teachings about the end times, the two messiahs, and the war of the sons of light formed the basis of the Qumran faith. But who was he? When did he live? And why did the community so carefully conceal his identity? The day Antiochus IV, Epiphanes, forbade observance of the Torah and desecrated the temple by installing a statue of Zeus there. The Maccabean revolt began. Judas Maccabeus liberated Jerusalem in 164 BCE, cleansed the temple, and restored worship. His dynasty, the Hasmoneans, ruled Judea for the next century. It was during this period that the teacher of righteousness appeared. Many scholars identify the wicked priest with one of the first Hasmonean rulers. Perhaps it was Jonathan or Simon Maccabeus, who illegally appropriated the high priesthood without belonging to the tribe of Zadok. The community considered itself the true Israel, remaining faithful to the covenant. The Jerusalem temple was defiled by unrighteous priests. The calendar of holidays was distorted. The sacrifices were displeasing to God. The teacher of righteousness led his followers into the desert to prepare the way for the Lord, as the prophet Isaiah had foretold. There, by the Dead Sea, they built a new temple, a temple of people, where prayer replaced sacrifice, and the study of the Torah became a sacred ritual. The Pesher on the book of the prophet Habakkuk reveals dramatic events. The wicked priest pursued the teacher of righteousness to devour him in his fury in the place of his exile. And during the Feast of Rest on the Day of Atonement, he came to them to devour them and cause them to stumble on the day of fasting, their day of rest. This attack took place on Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the Jewish calendar, but the community celebrated it on another day, according to their own calendar. The wicked priest knew this and used the moment to take revenge. The fate of the teacher of righteousness remains a mystery. Was he killed? The texts hint at this. The house of Absalom and the men of their council were silent when the teacher of righteousness was accused, and did not help him against the man of lies. The community believed that the teacher would rise again in the last days to judge his enemies. He would witness the fulfillment of the prophecies he had interpreted. This belief in the return of the slain righteous teacher, in his resurrection and final judgment, is strikingly reminiscent of early Christian ideas about Christ. A coincidence or a common source of eschatological expectations of that era? Some researchers went further. They saw in the teacher of righteousness a prototype, or even the prototype of Jesus, a righteous teacher who opposed the religious establishment, the founder of a community of the elect, an interpreter of Scripture, revealing the hidden meaning of prophecies, a victim of persecution by the high priests, the expectation of his return and judgment. The parallels are so obvious that conservative theologians have declared these theories an attempt to undermine the uniqueness of Christianity. The Vatican restricted access to the most controversial texts. The publication of the complete corpus of scrolls was delayed for half a century. What other secrets about the teacher of righteousness are hidden in the undeciphered fragments? The messianic texts of Qumran overturned ideas about the religious expectations of the Second Temple period. The community was not simply waiting for a Messiah, it was expecting several anointed ones, each with their own role in the coming kingdom. The community charter clearly speaks of the expectation of the prophet and messiahs of Aaron and Israel. 3 figures, not one. A prophet like Moses will herald the end times. The Messiah of Aaron, the priestly anointed one, will restore proper temple service. The Messiah of Israel, the royal anointed one from the house of David, will establish a just reign. This was radically different from later Christian and rabbinic concepts of a single Messiah. The community based its teaching on a literal reading of the prophecies. Deuteronomy promised a prophet like Moses. The Psalms spoke of the eternal kingdom of David's descendant. The prophet Malachi predicted the return of Elijah before the great day of the Lord. The books of Numbers and Genesis contained blessings to the tribe of Levi for eternal priesthood. The Messianic rule, or statute for the whole community of Israel in the last days, described the organization of life after the coming of the Messiahs. The document begins with words about how the community should live until the prophet and Messiahs of Aaron and Israel come. This is followed by the rules of the Messianic feast. The priest Messiah blesses the bread and wine first, then the Messiah of Israel, then all those gathered in order of rank. This ritual is strikingly similar to the description of the Last Supper in the Gospels, but it was created a century before the events of the Gospels. Fragments from the fourth cave contained even more mysterious messianic texts. The Aramaic Apocalypse described a figure called the Son of God and the Son of the Most High, who would establish an eternal kingdom. Christians applied these titles exclusively to Jesus. Their discovery in a pre-Christian Jewish text came as a shock. Did this mean that evangelical Christology borrowed terminology from existing eschatological concepts? Or was the text a Christian interpolation? Scientific debates continue to this day. Melchizedek of Cave 11 represented an even more exotic messianic figure. Melchizedek is the mysterious King of Salem and priest of God Most High, who blessed Abraham in the book of Genesis. The Epistle to the Hebrews in the New Testament presents Jesus as a priest in the order of Melchizedek. The Qumran text depicted Melchizedek as a heavenly being who, in the Jubilee year, would free captives, bring about redemption, and punish Belial, the prince of darkness. He is a cosmic judge who acts in heaven parallel to the earthly Messiah. The most controversial text was the one tentatively titled Messiah of Heaven and Earth. The fragment describes the deeds of the Messiah. Heaven and earth will listen to his Messiah. He will judge orphans and justify the poor. He will heal the wounded, raise the dead, and preach to the poor. These words almost literally coincide with Jesus' response to John the Baptist's disciples in the Gospel of Matthew. Coincidence? A common tradition of interpreting the prophet Isaiah? Or did the evangelists know the Qumran messianic concepts and apply them to Jesus? The Qumran messianic texts showed that the religious environment in which Christianity arose was saturated with diverse eschatological expectations. This did not diminish Christian teaching, but showed its roots in Jewish tradition. However, conservative Christian circles perceived these discoveries as a threat. If messianic concepts existed before Christ, how unique are the gospel narratives? This question still provokes heated theological debate. Scientific treatises were unexpectedly discovered among the Qumran texts. The community did not limit itself to studying the sacred writings. Members of the community created a complex astronomical system, developed a calendar different from the conventional one, studied the movement of the heavenly bodies, and linked them to the divine plan. This was not just religious cosmology. It was mathematical calculations based on many years of observation. The Qumran calendar was based on a solar cycle of 364 days, divided into 4 equal seasons of 91 days each. Each season consisted of 13 weeks. The year always began on Wednesday, the day of creation according to the book of Genesis. Holidays fell on the same days of the week every year. Passover always fell on Wednesday, Pentecost on Sunday, and the Day of Atonement on Friday. The community believed that the true calendar had been revealed by God to Enoch and recorded on heavenly tablets. The priests of Jerusalem had distorted it by following the pagans. Praying and celebrating on the wrong days meant insulting God. The Book of Heavenly Lights described the movement of the sun through 12 gates in the east and 12 in the west throughout the year. Each month, the sun entered through a new gate, determining the length of day and night. The moon passed through the same gates, but on a different schedule. The text contained accurate data on the phases of the moon, eclipses, and the position of constellations. The community used this knowledge to determine the times of prayers, fasts, and holidays. The priestly guard in the heavenly temple changes in sync with earthly dates according to the true calendar. But the calendar texts contained something more. Zodiacology and physiognomy linked a person's birth to the position of the stars and determined their character and destiny. The text divided people into 9 categories depending on the ratio of light and darkness at the moment of birth. A person born when the proportion of light was 8 parts out of 9 would be righteous, wise, and patient. Those in whom darkness prevailed were prone to evil and sin. It was an astrological system that determined the spiritual nature of a person by the position of the heavenly bodies. The community saw no contradiction between belief in divine predestination and astronomical calculations. The calendar was not just a way of counting time. It was the key to understanding divine history. Every anniversary, every 7-year period, every year had its place in the great plan of salvation. These texts showed that the boundary between religion and science, astronomy and astrology, did not exist in the ancient world. Knowledge of the laws of nature was considered knowledge of the divine will. The Qumran community created a synthesis of biblical faith and the scientific knowledge of its era. But the churches of later centuries rejected this tradition. Astrology was declared paganism, and the study of the influence of the stars was considered superstition. The Qumran calendar and astronomical texts showed that in early Judaism there was a different approach, one that did not contrast revelation and observation, faith and knowledge, the sacred and the scientific. The fourth cave contained texts that the religious authorities would have preferred never to see. Among the fragments were found incantations, exorcism formulas, and prayers for protection from demons. The Songs of the Wise Man contained instructions for expelling evil spirits in the name of God and the holy angels. The Apocryphon of Joseph recounted how the patriarch Joseph used magic formulas to protect himself from Egyptian sorcerers. The community believed that the world was inhabited by demons led by Belial, or Mastema, the prince of darkness. These entities cause illness, tempt the righteous, and lead people astray from the path of truth. Only when Noah was born, his father Lamech was frightened by the unusual appearance of the baby, white with shining eyes. He suspected that the child was conceived by an angel, like the children of the watchers before the flood. Lamech turned to his father, Methuselah, who went to Enoch. Enoch assured them that Noah was the legitimate descendant of Adam, but that the world was awaiting a new flood because of the sins committed by the angels and their children. History showed that the memory of the fallen angels and their half-human, half-divine descendants remained in the collective memory. The community practiced rituals of purification from demonic influence. Repeated ablutions in cold water washed away not only physical impurity, but also spiritual defilement. Certain prayers, recited at the right time according to the sacred calendar, created protection from evil forces. Fasting and abstinence weakened the power of carnal demons. Studying the Torah enlightened the mind and made it invulnerable to demonic deception. The community created a comprehensive system of spiritual warfare against invisible enemies. One text described 4 periods of Belial's power over humanity. The first was from Adam to Noah, when fallen angels corrupted the earth. The second was from Noah to Abraham, when people built the Tower of Babel and worshipped idols. The third was from Abraham to the coming of the Messiah, a mixed time when light and darkness struggle. The fourth period would come if people rejected the Messiah. Then Belial would gain complete power for a short time before the final judgment. The community saw itself in the third period, preparing for the transition to the fourth. The Christian Church later declared these beliefs to be heresy. Dualism, The idea of two cosmic forces fighting for world domination contradicted monotheism. Magical practices and incantations were considered incompatible with faith. But the Qumran texts showed that at the dawn of Christianity, these ideas were part of mainstream Judaism. Jesus cast out demons, the apostles practiced exorcism, and early Christians believed in the reality of spiritual warfare. These elements were not borrowed from paganism. They existed in the Jewish tradition, preserved in the Qumran scrolls. The discovery of magical texts caused confusion in church circles. If the community that created the biblical manuscripts practiced magic, how could one distinguish the religious from the occult? Where was the line between prayer and incantation, between belief in angels and demonology? The Qumran texts blurred these boundaries, showing that ancient Judaism was richer and more complex than official doctrines, and this knowledge was dangerous to religious institutions built on clear distinctions between orthodoxy and heresy. From the moment of the first discoveries, an unspoken war began for control of the scrolls. Archbishop Samuel took 4 manuscripts to the United States, where they ended up on the antique market. Professor Sukenik purchased 3 others for the Hebrew University. This Catholic institution became the main custodian and interpreter of the scrolls for the next half-century. Publication proceeded at a surprisingly slow pace. By 1960, only a small portion of the texts had been published. Thousands of fragments remained inaccessible to the scientific community. DeVoe's team consisted mainly of Catholic scholars. They were given a monopoly on deciphering and interpreting the most important documents. An agreement with the Jordanian authorities prohibited publication without the team's consent. Photographs of the scrolls were kept under lock and key. Even photocopies were issued to selected researchers under strict control. Suspicions arose about the deliberate concealment of information. Why was publication being delayed for decades? Which texts were being guarded particularly carefully? Journalist John Allegro, the only non-Christian on DeVoe's team, was the first to speak out about censorship. In 1956, he appeared on BBC Radio, stating that the scrolls contained information that called into question the foundations of Christianity. His Christian colleagues accused him of sensationalism and excluded him from the project. But the questions remained. The Six-Day War of 1967 changed the situation. Israel captured East Jerusalem and the West Bank. The scrolls came under Israeli control. The Ministry of Antiquities demanded that publication be expedited, but the École Biblique team resisted. They cited the complexity of working with fragments, the need for careful verification, and scientific integrity. In reality, each member of the team received certain texts for their personal use and could publish them at their discretion and in their own time. By 1980, the scientific community's patience had run out. The Huntington Library in California announced that it had a complete set of photographs of all the scrolls and was opening them up to researchers. The monopoly was broken. In 2 years, more texts were published than in the previous 40 years. When scholars finally gained access to all the materials, it became clear why publication had been delayed. Some of the texts did indeed contain information that was uncomfortable for traditional Christianity. Messianic concepts that preceded Christ, rituals similar to Christian sacraments, ethical teachings reminiscent of the Sermon on the Mount. All of this existed in the Jewish environment before the emergence of Christianity. This control over the texts was in the hands of Catholic scholars for half a century. Publication only accelerated after this control was lost. The most controversial interpretations appeared after 1991. Robert Eisenman and Michael Wise published 50 previously unknown texts in the book The Dead Sea Scrolls Unadorned. The Catholic Church condemned these theories as irresponsible speculation, but it was too late to stop the avalanche of publications. The most sensational scandal was caused by the interpretation of the text, Messiah of Heaven and Earth. The fragment contained a phrase that some scholars read as, "He will kill the Messiah." If this interpretation is correct, then the Qumran community expected a suffering and slain Messiah a century before Christ. But the discussion showed that even the possibility of such an interpretation forces a rethinking of the origins of key Christian doctrines. Another text, called the Herald, described a figure anointed by the Spirit who proclaims good news to the humble, heals the brokenhearted, and preaches freedom to the captives. These words are taken from the book of the prophet Isaiah and applied to the messianic figure. In the Gospel of Luke, Jesus reads the same passage in the synagogue and declares, "Now this scripture is fulfilled." The Qumran text showed that this interpretation of Isaiah as a messianic prophecy existed in Judaism before Christ. The evangelist did not create a new interpretation. He applied an existing one to Jesus. The Aramaic Apocalypse, which mentioned the Son of God and the Son of the Most High, sparked a decade-long debate. The first publishers claimed that the text referred to a future tyrant king who would be defeated by the Messiah. This meant that the titles Son of God were applied to a villain, not a savior. But a re-examination of the fragments showed that the text could be read differently. Son of God is a messianic title for a positive figure. The dispute showed how easily interpretation depends on the researcher's assumptions. A believing Christian sees one thing in the texts, a skeptic sees another. Professor Norman Golb of the University of Chicago put forward a radical theory. He argued that the scrolls were not related to the Essenes at all. They were the library of the Jerusalem temple, hidden in caves during the Jewish revolt. The diversity of texts and points of view in the scrolls is indeed difficult to explain if they were all created by one sect. But archaeological data on the Qumran settlement contradicts Golb's theory. The debate continues, showing that even basic questions about the origin of the scrolls remain controversial. The Israeli authorities attempted to take control of the scientific process. In 1992, they established the Israel Antiquities Authority, which was given the power to regulate access to the scrolls. A new editorial team with broader representation was appointed. Religious restrictions weakened, but political ones appeared. Palestinian scholars complained of discrimination. Jordanians demanded the return of finds made in the territory they controlled. The scrolls became an instrument of geopolitics. By the 2000s, almost all of the texts had been published. But the controversy continued. Radical scholars saw them as proof of the evolutionary development of religious ideas without divine intervention. The truth, as always, is more complex than either extreme position. But the very fact that discussions continue shows that the Qumran scrolls continue to challenge established ideas about the origins of Judaism and Christianity. The scroll was 2.5 meters long. Over time, the copper oxidized and became so fragile that it was impossible to unroll the scroll without destroying it. In 1955-1956, it was cut into 23 strips at the University of Manchester. Only each gold, so many silver vessels, so many sacred garments. The under some locations may refer to Jerusalem, others to the vicinity of Qumran, and still others to unknown places. Without additional information, it is impossible to decipher the treasure map. Hundreds of treasure hunters have scoured the vicinity of Qumran over the past 70 years. No one has found anything. Where did these riches come from? One theory claims that they are the treasures of the Jerusalem Temple, hidden before the Roman invasion of 68 AD. The temple was the richest institution in Judea, accumulating offerings from all over the Jewish world for centuries. When it became clear that the Romans would destroy the temple, the priests secretly took the treasures and hid them in the desert. They engraved a list of hiding places on copper so that they could be retrieved after the victory of the uprising. But the uprising was suppressed. The temple was destroyed, and the priests died or scattered. The map remained, but those who could read it disappeared. Skeptics point to the fantastic sums on the list. 198 tons of precious metals exceeded all the gold and silver that could have been in the temple. Perhaps the figures are exaggerated, or are different units of measurement used? Some similar lists of hidden treasures existed in Jewish folklore. Apocryphal texts about the riches of King Solomon, or the temple treasury, which would be found in Messianic times. The last entry on the copper scroll is particularly mysterious. In a pit near the 12th step, 40 cubits away, is a second duplicate of this document with explanations and dimensions of each item. There is a second scroll that deciphers the first. Without it, the map is useless. Where is this duplicate? Was it found and hidden? Or is it still waiting in some cave? This hint at the existence of a second part has ignited the imagination of adventure seekers and conspiracy theorists. The Israeli government has officially banned unauthorized excavations in the Qumran area. But that doesn't stop enthusiasts. Armed with metal detectors and radars, and relying on various interpretations of the text, they continue their search. The copper scroll remains the most tangible of the Qumran mysteries, the only one that promises not only knowledge, but also gold. 75 years after their discovery, the Qumran scrolls continue to change our understanding of religious history. They have shown that Judaism in the Second Temple period was much more diverse than previously thought. There was no single orthodoxy. There were many movements, each with its own interpretations of scripture, practices, and beliefs. The Pharisees, Sadducees, and Essenes represented only 3 of the main movements. Within each, there were additional subgroups. The Qumran community was one of many, but thanks to the desert climate, its library was preserved. The biblical texts of Qumran proved the reliability of the transmission of Scripture. Despite the millennium separating the Qumran manuscripts from the medieval manuscripts, the texts remained largely identical. The copyists worked with remarkable accuracy. However, The scrolls also showed that there were different textual traditions in ancient times. The process of canonization, the selection of a particular version of the text as the standard, was only completed after the destruction of the temple. Before that, the multiplicity of versions was considered normal. The influence of the scrolls on Christian theology cannot be overestimated. They neither confirmed nor refuted the gospel accounts of Jesus. No mention of Jesus, John the Baptist, or any of the apostles was found in the Qumran texts, but the scrolls revealed the religious context in which Christianity arose. Messianic expectations, eschatological enthusiasm, the dualism of light and darkness, communal life with shared property, ritual ablutions, sacred meals, all of this existed in Judaism before the Christian era. Debate perhaps the early Christians borrowed organizational forms and rituals from similar communities. Other researchers insist on independent development. The similarities are explained by a common biblical basis and eschatological sentiments typical of that era. Christianity was a unique but not isolated phenomenon. The scrolls are no less important for Judaism. They preserved alternative traditions of interpretation that were not included in the rabbinic canon. After the destruction of the temple, the Pharisee rabbis created the normative Judaism that we know today. But the priestly tradition of the Essenes, their calendar, and their interpretations of the law represent an alternative path that could have developed differently had it not been for the military catastrophe of 70 CE. The dead apocalyptic literature, messianic expectations, ethical teachings, elements that Christians considered uniquely Christian, turned out to be part of a broader Jewish tradition. This does not diminish Christianity, but shows its organic connection to Jewish soil. Understanding this context enriches both religions and helps to overcome centuries of mutual misunderstanding. The art scholars reconstructed the language of that era from biblical texts and later sources. The scrolls provided thousands of pages of living language, how people actually wrote and spoke in those days. There was no moment when everything was established once and for all in an unchanging form. Religion is a living process, where each generation interprets ancient revelations in its own context. Each group considered itself the guardian of the true tradition. They were all right, and they all created something new. Despite 7.5 decades of research, the Qumran scrolls still hold secrets. Tens of thousands of tiny fragments remain unidentified. They are too small to determine which text they belong to. The letters have faded. The leather has disintegrated. But technology does not stand still. Multispectral imaging allows us to read faded ink. Infrared and ultraviolet images reveal letters invisible to the human eye. Artificial intelligence analyzes handwriting and helps put fragments together in the correct order. Every year, new passages are deciphered. In 2017, archaeologists announced new excavations in the Qumran area. They found a 12th cave that had been looted in the 1950s. Traces of textile wrappings and ceramic vessels showed that scrolls had also been stored here, but looters had taken them away half a century ago. These manuscripts may be somewhere on the black market or in private collections. An international campaign to find illegally exported fragments continues. In 2020, the U.S. returned several stolen fragments to Israel, which had been seized from collectors. The Bible Museum in Washington became the center of a scandal. The billionaire evangelist who founded the museum purchased dozens of fragments, supposedly from Qumran. In 2018-2020, scientific analysis showed that they were all fakes. This showed how high the demand for Qumran materials is, so high that the counterfeiting industry is thriving. Climate change threatens the remaining materials. Rising temperatures and humidity in the Dead Sea area accelerate the degradation of organic materials. The Israel Antiquities Authority uses advanced conservation techniques to preserve the texts that have already been found. Climate control, special storage facilities, and minimizing light and contact all help to prolong the life of these 2,000-year-old documents. Digitization makes the scrolls accessible to researchers around the world. The Dead Sea Scrolls Digital Library Project has published high-quality images of thousands of fragments in the public domain. Anyone can study ancient manuscripts on their computer. Crowdsourcing projects attract volunteers to decipher difficult-to-read fragments. Perhaps the next important discovery will be made not by a professional scientist, but by an amateur viewing digital images at home. But the biggest mystery is what has not yet been found. The Qumran community existed for about 200 years. Is the library of 11 caves all they created in 2 centuries? Unlikely. Where are the rest of the texts? Were there other hiding places that have been destroyed by time or not discovered by archaeologists? The Damascus document mentions communities in various places in Judea. Did they create their own libraries? Perhaps in other caves in the desert or under the ruins of ancient settlements lie scrolls that will rewrite the history of religion once again. Sometimes Bedouins bring fragments of manuscripts to antique dealers. Where do they come from? From new finds or from stocks made decades ago and hidden away? In 2001, a fragment of the Book of Leviticus in ancient Hebrew appeared on the black market. Analysis showed that it was an authentic manuscript of approximately the same age as the Qumran scrolls. But it was not found in Qumran. The seller did not say where exactly. This means that somewhere in the desert, there are still caves with scrolls that only the local residents know about and keep secret. The Qumran scrolls forever changed biblical scholarship and religious studies. But their story is not over. With every new technological breakthrough, every archaeological expedition, and every declassified private archive, there is the possibility of new discoveries. Ancient manuscripts are still capable of surprising, shocking, and forcing us to rethink established truths. The caves of the Judean desert may hide information that will answer questions that have tormented humanity for 2,000 years. Or perhaps it will raise new questions, even more complex ones.